Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Chetan Fadke again, and we'll continue our discussion on fat. So far in this series on fat, we have talked about the importance of visceral fat and why it is problematic. It's associated with many diseases. Then we talked about what is the source of fat, how is fat produced in the body, and what is the fat we need from our diet. All right, so the next question we're going to address in this video is why is fat stored? What is the purpose of storage? Well, here are some things that I have learned about fat. That fat doesn't really give you satisfaction when you eat. What really gives you satisfaction is carbohydrates, not the flour, not the processed, not the refined grains, but whole grains. Whole grains, potatoes, carrots, beans, these kind of foods are starchy foods, and they are the ones that make us full, they make us satisfied, they make us say, all right, I had enough food, I can stop now. But that does not happen with fat. Why not? For a couple of reasons, I think. One is when we eat food, our stomach fills up with food. And when it fills up, the stomach walls stretch and sends a signal to the brain that you had enough food. The other is our stomach wall sort of has sensors built into it. It can see how much is fat, how much is carbohydrates, how much is proteins. It can sense that. Anyway, there's a hormone called ghrelin, which is released when we are full, and that tells the brain that, all right, you can stop eating now. The thing is, with fat, these things don't happen because fat is what, if you look at fat is oil, right? If you look at oil, that's pure fat. So oil doesn't really take up a lot of room in our stomach. It doesn't stretch the wall, it doesn't release ghrelin. So I think that's why we never really uh, feel full from eating fat. Now the question is why? Why? There's a reason why everything is designed. It's not a random chance or accident why the biology or physics or chemistry, whatever you want to call it, is the way it is. All right, so here's my effort at trying to understand why that is the case. If you think about man, thousand, not thousand, well, 10,000 years ago, man was hunter-gatherer. So in hunter-gatherer lifestyle, where as a civilization, we hadn't really learned how to cultivate crops. We were hunter and gatherers. We would follow our prey. We would go wherever they were, deer or whatever be the case, we would follow them and we would hunt and eat. All right. So hunting is hard. I don't know how many of you have done it. I've never done it. I have no interest in doing it, but I would imagine it would be a very highly strenuous activity, which would require stalking the prey and then chasing the prey or running away from predators, killing the prey, eating it. So you would go probably days without having any food. So in those circumstances, whenever you get something fatty, and the only thing that is fatty in nature is the meat. Well, there are fruits too, some fruits like avocados and nuts and things like that. But we're talking about 10,000 years ago when man hadn't really discovered agriculture, or maybe 20,000, way back. We're talking about evolutionary, how the brain and the chemistry evolved. So back in those days, there would be famine, or there would be starvation. So for days like that, when you would go days or months, not months, days without eating anything, you would need something to fill you up. So you lose job, you don't have any money left. So then you go into your savings, and the savings sort of sustain you till you get back on your feet, you get a job again, or if you're on maternity leave here in Canada, you're on employment insurance, you go back to work, and then you can start earning again. But in the meantime, is the savings, the fat. So the more savings you have, the better off you are, right? So that's why I think our body doesn't really have a stop signal for fat consumption. Eat as much as you can because it'll give you more chances for survival in the future. But here's the problem: in today's world, the famine never comes. We never have to dip into our savings because we continuously keep earning. So that's one of the reasons why I, I remember when I was a kid in school, we read a story where there were some villagers and they describe a feast. there's a wedding in the village and there's a feast, and that the feast happened once in a while, because how many women or how many men would get married, in a year in a small village? Maybe three, four, five weddings. Let's just say one every 2 months. But anyway, the excitement was about fried bread. It's called puri in India. Basically, flat bread, deep fried, puffs up. So those characters in the book that we read, the story we read, the villagers in India, they would be so excited about eating puri, about eating deep fried flatbread, and they would eat up as much as they could. And I wondered why that was, and that's the same reason, because feasts and marriages, well, first of all, feasts only happened at special occasions, like marriage, for example, because nobody had the money to afford that kind of food. The second thing is, when you got a chance, people would eat up because they would enjoy and eat a lot. But then, in today's world, in India, puri, you can eat puri anytime. As a matter of fact, in some cultures, puri is like a breakfast. You eat puri, That's not very different than American or Canadian breakfast or Western breakfast, where you have sausage, which is very fatty food. All right. So the other thing I wanted to tell you about was, again, going back historically. I love history, by the way. And I was watching Dr. McDougall's video, and he was describing this about mummies. What they did was they scanned the mummies. They did X-rays or some kind of imaging of the mummies, and what they found was they had evidence of coronary artery disease. The coronary arteries were blocked. So they were saying that the authors said that, well, heart disease is not such a new phenomenon. It's been there, thousands of years ago. Dr. McDougall made a good point. He said, well, these are mummies. Who are the mummies? The mummies are the royalty. They are the rich. They are the kings and their family. And they are the ones who get to be buried in the pyramids. The common man doesn't get buried in the pyramid. The common man probably gets a regular burial. So those mummies that were preserved are royal families. And what did they eat? They ate the best food there was, the rich food. They didn't eat simple food like the peasants or the regulars. They were noble. They would eat rich food. Rich food, rich food diseases also. You would see in those people. So anyway, that's another example of how obesity was seen in royal families as well. All right, so the next question then is, if you're trying to lose weight, what do you do? Do you cut out the fat, or do you go low carb like a lot of people do? I used to do as well. But for that, before we answer that question, let's go back to a question of what happens to fat and glucose once it enters the blood. So glucose is a molecule that is primarily used by brain, by the red blood cells, and some cells in our kidneys. So these very specialized cells need glucose for metabolism. So glucose is really our currency. If you're in Canada, it's the Canadian dollar. If you're in America, it's the American dollar. If you're in UK, it's the pound. That's what is going to be accepted. That's what is going to make sure that business goes on. All right. So fat is like a traveler's check. How do you like that analogy? Traveler's check, or maybe you want to call it like a bond. So it doesn't really have immediate cash value, but in the case of emergency, it can be cashed for money. So, but if it's a bond, you have to go to the bank. It takes a few days. They'll take some interest off, charge you tax, income tax, and so on. So the point being that our primary currency is glucose and not fat, and fat is our savings. And in our next video, we'll talk a little bit about how much fat do we really need, and where do we get it from. All right. Well, little more patience, and we'll come back to it. All right. Be well.